Hi, everybody. It's good to be here tonight. I had to bring my friend with me. Do you think one of you children down here in the front row would like to just hold on to Fluffy until I finish? He'll be very good. I don't think he'll scratch or anything. Thank you. So, I was driving over here this afternoon, and I was looking at all the hills and all the hollers that we live around. And did you know there's granny witches in all those places? And they have this wonderful gift, and they pass it down from mother to daughter, and they have it generation after generation. These are the caregivers, and they sustain that gift with the whippoorwill and with the bitters of the lemon tea, and they are the healers. They know that if you put something on the palm of your soul, and that it would do away with all of the night sweats. They also know if you've been burned really bad and you blow smoke on that, and you know the right incantation, it'll take all the pain away. Pair of spider legs, guts of a dead cat, baby toes and buzzard eggs, blood of a dead rat. It works every time. Now, you call them a granny witch. That is not an insult. In fact, it is a title of honor. It is not a charge of a crime for doing that hillbilly hoodoo they voodoo so well. And they would argue the reason that they are so good at this is, why wouldn't you use everything Mother Nature provides? And I think we might all agree. There's a wonderful part about this. It's very mystical and very magical what they do. But not everybody wanted to accept the gift. And the story I'm going to tell you tonight, it is about the Sisters of the Castle on the River. And it was right over there near that old spooky place. It's where the Rose Island was, and the Devil's Backbone is over there. Now, the people who lived around that place, they called it Mistletoe Falls. That was the official name. The unofficial name is the Witch's Castle. And the people would tell you around there they seen some strange going on. They saw dark shadows, and they saw lights going all through the woods. And they say, do not go there, because that place is haunted. But it wasn't always that way. It used to be a really nice place. In fact, it was the homestead of the Madoc family, and they had come here from the old world. They were royalty from Wales. And when they came, they married into the shamans of the Mandan tribes. The Madocs, they were just wonderful people. They had great friends, and they had good neighbors. And the house they built, that house was so beautiful. It had big rock walls and tall ceilings, and it was light, bright, and just a gorgeous house. People came from miles around to take a look at that house. And it sat up high on the river, so they didn't have to worry about the flooding in the spring. The sisters who lived there were the last of the line. They were the maiden sisters, and there wouldn't be any more Madocs. There was Fiona, there was Cleo, and then there was Sister Maggie. And what wonderful sisters they were, and they were granny witches. They had the gift, and their special gift was they had learned how to do divine, wonderful potions in order to keep people healthy. And they found them in the wildflowers out in their fields, and they found them in the herb garden. They grew right there on their windowsills. And it was a wonderful time. And you know, they were very content. They were old now, but they were very content to live next door to that little town, and it was just a hustle and a bustle and growing a mile a minute. And they knew that when it was time for them to die and to move on and go through the veil into the next world, they'd be buried out back of that house right behind where all the rest of their kind was. Now, they liked staying around their house a lot. They didn't go out much, but they stayed there and taking care of their pigs and their chickens. And they had one old milk cow. Her name was Miss Bossy Pants. But when the sisters did go to town, they went in to sell their sachets of lavender and their hip rose. Or maybe they were somewhere in the middle of the night helping to birth a baby. Their neighbors, they knew that they were good. They were good people. And they respected them, and they were very grateful for the gifts those sisters gave to them. But storm clouds began to gather, and there was an old stranger that came to town one day, and his name was Mr. Scratch. Now that old Scratch, he came there already. He already had a plan. What he wanted to steal Mistletoe Falls right out from under those sisters' nose. Well, the first thing he did, the reason he wanted to do it too, you see the ferry that took people across over to Kentucky and coming back to Indiana, it was right there next to their land, and it was a booming business. There was all kinds of money to be made, and old Scratch, he decided he wanted that ferry company because he wanted to expand on it. And in order to do that, he had to have Mistletoe Falls. So he put a plan together, and he marched himself out to the sisters' house. It was a Wednesday, it was high noon, and the sisters were sitting in their dining room having lunch. And when they heard that knock on the door, and Sister Maggie got up and she went right over there and she opened that door up. And there was old Scratch standing there, his smile from ear to ear. Well, she said, "What do you want, son?" And he showed her. He had this big, long, very, very official looking document. And at the top of it, it said deed. And he said it had a big red wax seal, and it had ribbons coming down the sides. And it was even signed by the governor. Well, he told Miss Maggie and the other two girls, he said, "Well, this is my property now. The governor has given me this property for the service that I did during the war." Well, Miss Maggie looked at him like he had three heads. And she grabbed that piece of paper from him and slammed that door right in his face. Well, those girls were just a-cackling on the inside, and that just made him so mad, and he marched himself back down to the town. And he knew he was going to get even. Well, the sisters laughed about it, and they thought it was a fun thing, and that night they had this big cauldron that sits out on their lawn. They threw that paper inside there, and they burned it up. And they looked up, and there was a big full moon shining right down on them. And then, a week later, they were sitting in their house, and they were having lunch. It was noon, high noon, and they were having lunch again. It was a Wednesday. And they were sitting there, and all of a sudden they heard bang, bang, bang. And they went, "Well, Lord have mercy, what in the heck is going on?" Well, Miss Maggie went over and opened that door, and who was there? There was old Scratch. But this time, he was standing there with the sheriff. And the sheriff had nailed a big old eviction sign on their front door. Well, Miss Maggie was going to have none of that. And she ripped that thing right off and slammed that door right in their face. But this time, the sisters didn't laugh. They thought maybe, just maybe, this might be a little bit of a problem. But that night they took that eviction notice and they put it in the big cauldron out on the lawn and they set it afire. The next week, old Scratch decided he was going to take matters into his hands. and not wait around for the law. Well, what he did, he went down to the town and he started telling stories about these nice old ladies. And he started making up things. And then he told the people who had always been their friends and neighbors, you know, I've been thinking about the old ladies that live down that lane. I'm not real sure they're as sweet as you think they are. In fact, I think they could be in league with the devil. Well, the people looked at him like, well, that can't be true. We've known them our whole lives. But he kept talking, and then he got these 6 young girls. And those girls, they went out and they started telling stories too about those old ladies. And they said they'd been out in the woods and they'd seen them out there they were doing all kinds of rituals, and there was lights going through the forest. And then they said, we went up to their house and we looked, and they got all kinds of bones and all kinds of gourds and things sitting on their front porch. And then they told him, there's a stink coming out of that house. There's something they're doing in there that is not right. And there's smoke coming out of that chimney, and it does not smell good. Well, you can't believe it, but that old town started believing all those stories and everything that was being said. Well, the sisters, in another week, they decided they wouldn't go outside of their house, and they stayed in. But it was a Wednesday, it was high noon, and they were having lunch. And they heard a commotion coming up the lane all the way to their house, and they looked out the window, and there was old Scratch, and he was marching along. And behind him was the whole town. They'd all come down there to see them. And they came right up into their yard. And then one man stepped forward, and he had a bottle of kerosene, and it had a long wick on it, and he lit it. And he reared his arm back, and he let her fly. It went across that lawn, it went across their porch and into their house, and it exploded into a huge fireball. Well, that front door came open and that black smoke started coming out. And the sisters ran out. It was terrible. Sister Maggie's hair, her beautiful red hair, was on fire. And she ran over to the side and she put her head in the rain barrel that they kept over by the porch. And her sisters, Fiona and Cleo, they ran over to give her some solace and help her in her agony. But those people in that town had no pity on those sisters, and they grabbed a hold of them and they started pulling them across that lawn. And there were 6 big men who went over to the front gate and they ripped it off of the hinges and they carried it down to the river and they set it afloat. And they pulled and pushed and yelled, and those women pulled them down to the river and they threw them onto that float and pushed them out into the Ohio River. Well, the sisters pleaded for help. These had been their friends. Won't someone help us? And no one stepped forward. Not one woman, child, or man would step forward to help those girls. And then something really strange happened. Why, that old raft stopped right out there in the middle of the river. And when it did, those girls collapsed and they fell into a clump. Well, now the people up on the shore, they looked out there. There was no movement and there was no sound. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4. Not a sound was made. So then, those people on shore, those town folk, they decided those women must be dead. And they're not moving. Rigor mortis must have set in. Well, they gave a mighty cheer, because they had done what they had come to do. And they turned to go. Now, you might think that's the end of my story, but it's not. Because then the master of the universe sat up, looked about, and she started to laugh, as she sometimes does in these type of situations. And then things started getting real interesting. The crowd had turned to go, but now they heard this low growl, like, and when they turned around to look, those old ladies, they had started to stand up on that raft, and they came up in unison, and they looked like a giant phoenix coming up out of the ashes. And they started to shake, and their eyes bulged out of their head, and there was blood dripping from their lips. Now, no one on shore could do a dang thing. They were just sitting there, and they couldn't move. It was almost like they were under a spell. And those sisters started to scream like banshees. A curse on you all. We have always been your friend. We have always shared our gifts with you. And you set us out onto the river surely to die. A curse on you, a curse on this town and all that comes after. A curse on you all. For what has been will never be the same. Well, you can imagine, those people on the shore, they could not do anything. They just had to stand there and listen to those sisters scream. And then that old raft started moving very slow down the current while those sisters screamed the whole time. It took almost an hour for that raft to get down to 6 Mile Island and go around the head. And in all that time, they had to stand and listen. Now, some people say that raft did go on around 6 Mile Island and went on down, and it went over the falls. And that was the end of that story. But others think what happened was the raft went on down around 6 Mile Island, and it kind of drifted over, and it landed on Corn Island. And from there, those sisters, they freed themselves up and headed down to the wilds of Kentucky. In fact, I heard they settled right here in the woods of Blackacre Farm. And that's where they might be right now. We don't know for sure. But what we do know about this is that little town was never the same after the day that they did what they did to those girls. You know, it used to be like it was the big town on the river. It had the ferry, it had mills, it had a quarry. People were coming there and that town was growing, and there was lots of money to be made for all those people. But when those good town folk did what they did to those sisters, that was the end of that, and they sealed their fate. In that little town over in Kentucky named Louisville, well, it became the big metropolis. And if truth be known, my sisters Cleo and I made sure of that.
You're not going to get any better than that. Wonderful.